Cousin Thea announced her engagement at my graduation dinner. Not before, not after. Right in the middle of my toast. While I was mid-sentence thanking my aunt for helping me through school, Thea clinked her champagne glass and said loudly, "Since everyone's together anyway, Garrison and I have news." The table turned. My toast dissolved. Nobody asked me to finish it. I sat down and watched my aunt cry happy tears for her daughter, and I told myself it was fine. It was fine. I smiled. I clapped. I hugged Thea and said congratulations like I meant it. The truth? Part of me did mean it. The other part watched my graduation cake get pushed to the corner of the table, still in its box, never opened, and understood something clearly for the first time. In this family, I would always be the corner, never the center. My name is Serena. I'm 31. I've spent most of my life being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one my aunt and uncle pointed to when they needed something done. Taxes filed, forms completed, elderly neighbors checked on, and the one they forgot to point to when the champagne was poured. I should give you the full picture because without it, what happened later sounds like cruelty. And it wasn't cruelty, it was accounting. My parents died when I was 9, a car accident on a Tuesday in November, the kind of ordinary, terrible thing that rearranges your entire life in the span of a phone call. My mother's sister, my Aunt Claudette, took me in. She and my Uncle Ferris had one daughter, Thea, who was 7 at the time, and a 3-bedroom house in a suburb of Cincinnati that smelled like carpet cleaner and cedar candles. I was grateful. I am still grateful in the way you can be grateful for something and also honest about what it cost you. Because Aunt Claudette loved me the way you love a stray you've taken in. Carefully, at a distance. Conscious always that it wasn't quite the same as loving something that came from you. Thea got the birthday parties with ponies. I got the birthday dinners where Aunt Claudette made my favorite pasta and reminded me every year that she didn't have to do this, that she chose to, that I should remember that. I remembered. Every single year. By high school, I had 2 jobs, one at a bakery on Saturday mornings, one tutoring the neighbors' kids on weekday evenings. I paid for my own school supplies, my own clothes, my own SAT prep books. When I got into college on a partial scholarship, Aunt Claudette hugged me and said, "See, you didn't need us." She meant it as a compliment. I heard it as a confirmation. Thea, 2 years younger, got a full tuition fund, a car, an apartment near campus, and a monthly allowance that my uncle referred to as walking around money. When I asked once, I was 19 and exhausted and had just slipped out, whether there was anything left from my parents' estate. Uncle Ferris went very quiet and said the legal fees had absorbed most of it and the rest had gone to my care over the years. I didn't ask again. I became a forensic accountant instead. Not to be dramatic about it. I genuinely loved the work. I loved the logic of it. The way numbers couldn't lie even when people did. I was good at it, better than good. By 28, I was working as a senior investigator for a firm that contracted with regional corporations to audit internal financials. I found fraud the way some people find typos, automatically, almost without trying, pattern recognition firing before I'd even consciously registered the anomaly. My personal life was quieter. I had a boyfriend, Owen. A structural engineer with a dry sense of humor and a rescue dog named Clifford, who was terrified of thunder. We'd been together 4 years. We were not engaged. This was, according to Aunt Claudette, a personal failing of mine. Because Thea had gotten engaged at 26 and married at 27 to Garrison, a man who sold commercial real estate and referred to himself in the third person at family dinners. "Garrison just closed another deal," he would say, refilling his wine. "Garrison's been really crushing it lately. I liked him about as much as you'd expect." The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was reviewing flagged transactions for a client, deep in a spreadsheet, when my phone buzzed and I saw Aunt Claudette's name. I let it ring. She called again. I picked up on the third call. "Your cousin needs your help," she said, before I'd even said hello. "She's planning the anniversary gala and the venue coordinator is impossible, and Garrison says you're good with contracts." "On Claudette, I have a full caseload right now. It's family, Serena." Her voice took on that particular tone, the one she perfected over 20 years. Equal parts guilt and disappointment wrapped in reasonableness. "Thea is stressed. She's doing everything herself. You know how she gets." I did know how Thea got. Thea got overwhelmed and called me, and I fixed things, and then she took credit for the fix at the next family dinner. This had been the arrangement since we were children. "I'll think about it," I said. I told her you'd help, she said, and hung up. That night, Owen and I sat on the back porch with Clifford between us, and I told him about the call. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I loved about him. When I finished, he said, "You're going to help, aren't you?" "Probably." He scratched Clifford's ears. "At what point does helping become something else?" I didn't have an answer. I went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about it. And what I landed on wasn't an answer so much as a realization. I had been helping Thea my entire life, and not once had she helped me with anything. Not once had she shown up at my door with a casserole or a spreadsheet or a single useful thing. I thought about the graduation dinner. I thought about my cake in its box in the corner. I sent Aunt Claudette a text in the morning. I said I'd come to the planning meeting on Saturday. What I didn't say was that I'd also, that same morning, opened my firm's client portal and found a familiar name on the new assignment list. The Caldwell Group, a regional hospitality and events company with 3 luxury venues in Ohio, including the Meridian, which happened to be the venue Thea had booked for her 10th anniversary gala. The board had flagged irregularities in their accounts receivable department 6 weeks ago. My firm had been contracted to investigate quietly, internally, without alerting the staff. Standard procedure. I had been assigned the case 48 hours before Aunt Claudette called me. I looked at my screen for a long time. I wasn't Thea's event coordinator. I was the person hired to audit the company where her husband had been working as regional accounts director for the past 3 years. I logged into the Caldwell Group's secure portal. I typed my credentials. Senior External Auditor, Clearance Level B. I opened Garrison's department. I didn't start with suspicion. I started, as I always did, with patterns. The pattern started talking immediately. Garrison's department had processed an unusual volume of vendor payments over the past 18 months. The vendors themselves were unremarkable on the surface: catering suppliers, linen companies, AV equipment providers. But when I ran the business registration cross-checks, the story shifted. 2 of the 3 largest recurring vendors had been registered within 6 months of Garrison joining the company. One had no website. One had a registered address that matched a storage unit facility in Dayton. I leaned forward. The payments to these vendors totaled just under $280,000 over the course of 18 months. I followed the banking trail. The receiving accounts were business accounts, which was normal, except that 2 of them had been opened at the same credit union in the same week by someone whose initials matched a familiar pattern: GTH Garrison Thomas Hollowell. He wasn't just cooking the books. He was serving himself dinner. I sat with this for a moment. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't triumph. It was a specific, cold, clear feeling. The kind you get when a proof resolves and the answer is exactly as bad as you suspected. This was federal-level fraud. This was wire fraud and tax evasion. This was a man who had been systematically draining a company's accounts into his own pocket while his wife planned a 10th anniversary celebration in that same company's flagship venue. I printed nothing yet. I documented everything. I saved encrypted copies to 3 locations. And then I closed my laptop and drove to my aunt's house for the planning meeting. The meeting was in the living room. Thea had a vision board, an actual physical vision board, with magazine cutouts of floral arrangements and champagne towers, and a hand-lettered sign in the center that said "Teen Years Strong." Garrison wasn't there. He was at a work dinner, Thea said. Always working. You know how he is. So dedicated. I knew how he is. So dedicated. I knew how he was. Aunt Claudette made tea and set out a cheese plate and sat next to Thea on the couch with her hand over her daughter's hand. And together they looked at me across the coffee table like I was their project manager, which, functionally, I was. "The venue contract has an escalation clause," Thea said, sliding a folder across the table. "I don't understand it. Can you explain it?" I read the contract. It was a standard events agreement, not notably unusual, except for one clause on page 4, a termination clause tied to legal or criminal conduct by either party. In the event that either the venue operator or the event host was found to have engaged in criminal activity relevant to the contract relationship, the deposit was forfeit and the contract void. I looked up. Thea was watching me with a particular expression she'd had since childhood when she wanted something. Expectant, slightly impatient, absolutely certain I would deliver. "The clause is standard," I said. "It protects both parties." "But does it protect us if the venue has problems?" she asked. "It protects you if you have clean hands," I said. She laughed like I'd made a joke. "Of course we do," she said. "This is our 10th anniversary. I want it to be perfect." I smiled and nodded and helped her finalize the catering list and went home and did not sleep. In the weeks that followed, I did two things simultaneously. I continued the audit, and I continued helping Thea plan her gala because my aunt asked me to, and because proximity was useful, and because I needed to understand the full picture before I acted. The full picture took me 3 weeks to assemble, and when it was complete, it was worse than I'd initially found. Garrison hadn't stopped at vendor fraud. He had also been falsifying occupancy reports for the Meridian, specifically, inflating weekend booking numbers to justify a budget allocation he was then rerouting to his shell accounts. The total, when I finished my documentation, was $340,000 over 22 months. There was also an email. I found it in the flagged communications review, sent from Garrison's work account to a contact listed only as RM. The email discussed what he called a transition plan, his intention to leave the Caldwell Group before the internal review he apparently suspected was coming, taking the final quarter's inflated bonus with him and using the gala as a kind of farewell performance, a goodbye party he charged to the company's entertainment budget. He was going to let Thea celebrate their anniversary on money he'd stolen. He thought it was elegant. I read the email 4 times, then I printed it along with everything else and placed the entire package in a manila envelope. I wrote 2 words on the outside because I've always believed the documentation should be clean and simple. 10 years. The gala was a Friday in October, and it was, I'll admit, beautiful. The Meridian knew how to do events. The kind of chandelier-lit, flower ceilings, soft music drifting from string quartet room that made you feel like you'd walked into a different century. Thea had done a genuinely good job choosing the details. The floral arrangements alone must have cost more than my first car. Owen and I arrived early. He wore a dark suit he'd bought specifically because I'd asked him to. He looked, quietly and without making any fuss about it. Excellent. We walked in through the main entrance and past the coat check and into the ballroom, and Owen leaned down and said, close to my ear, "You look like you're about to do something." "I'm about to have dinner," I said. He said. Thea found us near the bar. She looked genuinely happy, radiant, actually, flushed and laughing, her hair swept up, Garrison's arm around her waist as he shook hands with someone in a charcoal blazer. She waved us over. Garrison greeted Owen with the kind of handshake that meant something to men like Garrison and nothing to men like Owen, then looked at me with the barely concealed condescension he'd carried for years. "Serena," he said, "good of you to come. I hear you basically planned the whole thing." "I helped with the contracts," I said. "Write the contracts." He said it the way you'd say someone helped with the napkin folding. "Thea couldn't have managed without you. She's never been great with details." Thea laughed a little uncomfortably. I watched her and felt something complicated. Not anger at her exactly, but something sadder. She genuinely didn't know. She thought she had a good marriage to a man who worked hard and provided. She had no idea she was standing on a foundation that was being quietly dismantled underneath her. The room filled. Dinner was served. Speeches were made. Garrison's business partners and golf friends, and the Caldwell Group's regional director, a man named Mr. Pemberton, who had flown in from Columbus and sat at the head table with an expression I recognized, the expression of someone who knows something is coming and is waiting for the right moment. He caught my eye across the room. He nodded once. I had submitted my final report to the board 3 days before the gala. The decision about timing had been theirs. I had included in my cover letter 1 recommendation, if possible, handle it quietly. Give Thea the information separately, privately, before Garrison had a chance to spin it. The board had considered this and decided on a different approach. After the main course, Mr. Minchudis, Pemberton stood and asked for the room's attention. He thanked everyone for attending. He spoke briefly about the company's values, integrity, accountability, the long-term partnerships that made a hospitality business what it was. He said that the evening celebration had reminded him how important it was to honor genuine commitment. Then he said, "Before we continue, I'd like to introduce someone who has spent the last several weeks doing critical work on behalf of this company. Serena Oakes, our lead forensic investigator, has my deepest professional respect." The room went quiet in that particular way. That means no one is breathing. Garrison's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "Mr. Rena." Pemberton laid out the findings clearly, without drama, the way you present a financial audit, the amounts, the timeline, the mechanism, the evidence. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. The numbers were their own indictment. When he finished, Garrison stood up. I give him this. He didn't try to run. He stood and looked across the table at me with an expression that moved through several stages: shock, calculation, something that might have been admiration, before settling into a cold, flat fury. You were helping her plan this event, he said. I was helping Thea, I said. I was also doing my job. Those two things didn't conflict. You had a conflict of interest. I disclosed my family relationship to the board on day one of the engagement, I said. They determined it didn't compromise the investigation. The evidence stands regardless of who found it. Two men I hadn't seen before were moving through the edges of the room. Garrison saw them too. His jaw tightened. Thea was very still. She hadn't spoken. She was looking at her husband, and her face was doing something private and devastating that I couldn't watch directly. Garrison was arrested at 9:37 p.m., still in his anniversary dinner suit, in the lobby of the Meridian. The gala ended. The caterers quietly cleared dessert. The string quartet packed up their instruments. I found Thea standing near the window in the side corridor, holding her champagne glass with both hands like she needed something to hold. When she heard me, she didn't turn around. She said, "Did you know when you came to the planning meeting?" I knew there were irregularities, I said. I didn't have the full picture yet. She was quiet for a moment. Did Aunt Claudette know you were investigating? No. No one knew except the board. She turned around then. Her eye makeup had tracked down one cheek, and she either didn't know or didn't care. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. And then she said, very quietly, "What happens to the deposit?" I told her about the conduct clause, the one she'd asked me to explain weeks ago. Criminal conduct by a party materially connected to the contract. The $45,000 deposit was legally forfeit. She closed her eyes. "Thea," I said, "I'm sorry. I know this isn't." "Don't," she said. Not unkindly, just firmly. "Not tonight, okay? Just firmly. Not tonight. Okay? Not tonight." I nodded. I went back to find Owen. What followed was the legal and financial unraveling of a life Garrison had built on borrowed scaffolding. He was charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. He pled not guilty, which his attorney must have advised against, because the evidence was what my mentor used to call a closed room: no exits, no alternative interpretations, nowhere to go except through it. He was convicted 14 months later and sentenced to 4 years. The civil suit from the Caldwell Group recovered $218,000 of the $340,000. The rest was gone, spent on the kind of life Garrison had decided he deserved. Thea filed for divorce while the criminal case was still pending. She moved into a smaller apartment and got a job at a nonprofit that worked with financial literacy programs, which felt, when she told me, like the universe had a very specific sense of irony. We talk now, more than we ever did before, in that careful, rebuilding way of two people who have never quite known each other and are deciding, late, whether to try. Aunt Claudette called me 6 weeks after the gala. She was upset. Not with Garrison, which surprised me, but at the publicity of it, the way the story had gotten into local news, the way people from the neighborhood were talking. She said I could have handled it more privately. She said I'd embarrassed the family. I let her finish. And then I said, as evenly as I could, "Aunt Claudette, I found $340,000 in fraud. I documented it. I disclosed my relationship to the board. I did my job correctly, and I told Thea the truth before she spent another year married to someone who was stealing from his employer. What exactly would private have looked like?" She didn't answer. "I've been useful to this family my entire life," I said. "I'm glad I could be useful here too." I hung up. I looked at the ceiling of my home office for a while, the one I'd bought without anyone's help, the one Owen had moved into last year, the one where Clifford had claimed the corner of the couch as unambiguously his. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No spotlight. No music. Owen came in and set a mug of coffee on my desk without saying anything. He sat on the couch. Clifford put his head in Owen's lap and closed his eyes. I picked up the coffee. It was the right temperature. There's a thing people always want to know when they hear a story like this. Did it feel good? Did you want this? Did you plan it? Secretly, from the moment you opened that client portal and saw the Caldwell Group's name? Honestly, I don't know. I know I did my job. I know I protected a company from a man who was systematically stealing from it. I know I gave my cousin the truth when the alternative was continuing to let her plan a celebration on stolen money. Whether that was justice or accounting or just me finally. After 31 years, putting the cake in the center of the table instead of the corner. Maybe it doesn't matter what you call it. It happened. The numbers don't lie. And for the first time in my life, neither did I. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty. They word it differently. Was it hard, or do you regret how it went? But what they're really asking is whether I should have protected Thea from the truth a little longer, or handled Garrison more quietly, or let the whole thing play out without my fingerprints on it. And I understand why they ask. It's a reasonable question to wonder about when you watch someone's marriage and financial stability unravel in the span of one dinner. But here's what I've come to understand about guilt. It requires that you did something wrong. I didn't. I did my job. I told the truth. I gave the people who hired me exactly what they were owed, and I gave my cousin exactly what she deserved to know about the man she was celebrating. The thing about Garrison wasn't that he was unusually evil. He wasn't a monster in a film. He was something more ordinary, and therefore more dangerous. A man who had decided, gradually, incrementally, that the rules applied to other people, that his intelligence entitled him to take what he wanted, that the people around him, including Thea, including the company that trusted him, were resources to be managed rather than people to be honest with. That kind of thinking doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly, one small justification at a time, until $340,000 is gone, and someone like me is sitting in a conference room following the trail. What I think about most, honestly, isn't Garrison. It's the version of myself that almost didn't open that client portal. The version that almost let Aunt Claudette's call be the whole story. Just Serena helping again. Reliable Serena. Useful Serena. The one who shows up and fixes things and doesn't ask for anything back. I'd played that role so long it had started to feel like identity rather than choice. The moment I understood the difference was the moment I stopped being afraid of my own competence. Because that's what it really was. Fear. Not of confrontation, not of hurting Thea, but of standing fully in what I knew and what I could do and letting that matter as much as what my family needed from me on any given Saturday afternoon. Integrity isn't comfortable. I want to be clear about that because I think people sometimes imagine that doing the right thing comes with a clean, uncomplicated feeling. It doesn't, or at least it didn't for me. I sat with the weight of what I knew about Garrison for weeks, while I helped Thea pick floral arrangements, and there was nothing easy about that. But discomfort and wrongness are not the same thing. You can feel the full difficulty of a situation and still be doing exactly what you should. What Serena learned, what I learned, is that intelligence without the courage to use it honestly is just a more elaborate way of hiding. I had every tool I needed for years. The training, the instincts, the access. What I finally found was the willingness to let the truth be the truth regardless of who it inconvenienced. Thea and I are still finding our way to each other. It's slow and it's imperfect, and some conversations are still harder than they should be. But they're real now. That's worth more to me than 20 more years of cheese plates and vision boards and being the corner of someone else's room. The numbers don't lie. And eventually, neither do the people who know how to read them.